Hi, I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. So in the movies and the Clone Wars TV show, we see a lot of the Clone Wars from several different perspectives. We see much of it from the perspective of the Jedi, but we do see a lot from the perspective of the clone troopers, and even from many of the politicians, at least on the Republic side, that were engaged in wartime politics or the conflict itself. But what we don't get a good look at is how the Clone Wars affected the everyday citizen of the Republic. Now, how you were affected by the Clone Wars depended almost entirely on which planet you lived on. So let's start with the core of the Republic, the most populated planet in the galaxy, and that is Khorasan. The people of Khorasan were actually in a rather interesting position. Well, for much of the duration of the conflict, the war was physically very far away. They were always under constant threat. With Khorasan being the capital of the Republic, it was always a key strategic target for the Separatists. And the people of Khorasan knew that, so they always felt like they were constantly under threat. They knew they were sitting on a massive bullseye. But in general, their everyday, day-to-day lives mainly were affected in the form of food rations and propaganda. It kind of feels like many of the population living in the upper levels of Khorasan were generally in favor of the war, feeling like it was a patriotic struggle against this rebellious faction. However, the lower you get on the economic scale, the less in favor of the war people seem to be. When you get down into the underworlds of Khorasan, into the criminal underbelly of the Republic, you see people that are generally opposed to the fighting. They tend to get less drawn up in the grand political struggle. That leaves them with kind of a sour taste in their mouth, and war being relatively unpopular. This isn't that much different from what we see in real life when countries go to war. However, as you move away from Khorasan to some of the other worlds of the Republic, the feelings on the war can change drastically. Obviously, worlds closer to the battlefront are far more concerned about ending the war and putting a stop to the confrontation. After all, a raging military conflict would seem less like a big patriotic struggle and more like an imminent threat to your safety were it right on your doorstep. As such, many Republic worlds that felt like they were vulnerable to Separatist attack were very anti-war. And that sentiment is very certainly held by their populations as well. These populations would, like Khorasan, have to deal with things like food rationing and prolific Republic propaganda. But they would have a very different fear from the fear held by the citizens of Khorasan. The citizens of Khorasan, well, reasonably afraid that the Separatists would attempt to strike their homes, as Khorasan is the capital of the Republic. The people of Khorasan could sleep easy knowing that even though they were a major Separatist target, they were very far from the Separatist forces that could threaten them. For much of the war, Khorasan felt kind of untouchable, even though it was a tempting target. And this doesn't even bring us to the topic of the few worlds that had actually faced Separatist occupation. Worlds like Ryloth and Christophsis, which had seen massive, raging battles that had devastated their population. They had to watch their friends and their family killed in crossfire between Republic and Separatist forces. That is on top of the family members they had to watch be killed just by Separatist forces in general. And when you look at those worlds, it comes down to a planet-by-planet basis. A world like Ryloth, which seems to have kind of a rebellious streak in it just naturally, is willing to stand up and fight for their people, and while they may loathe the fact that the war is going on, were much more concerned with preserving Ryloth than they were with the conflict as a whole. But you look at other worlds that were attacked by the Separatists, and you get a very different image. Many of the worlds that saw firsthand the devastation that this conflict could cause would wish it on no other world. As such, many of those worlds did harbor very strong anti-war sentiment. In general, much of the Republic populace was, well, content with fighting the war, generally wished it would come to an end soon. Much of the war fever that swept through the population in the early days of the military conflict, which we see here and there throughout various pieces of media, was gone by the midpoint of the war, and it came down to where you were and how close the fighting felt. Most of the people's daily lives were affected with, as I mentioned before, food rations and propaganda, the things necessary to keep the supply lines of the Republic up and running, as well as to keep the massive Republic war machine, which was brand new at the start of the war, functioning and able to maintain this fight. But that's the Republic side. If you want a glimpse into what the Separatist half of the war might have felt about this conflict, I actually have, as one of the first videos I uploaded on this channel, a video about the Separatist crisis, which was the crisis that started the Clone Wars. In that video, I discuss what drove the Separatists to want to leave, and I'm sure that played a very big role in how they felt about the conflict. If you want to go watch that video, I'll throw a link up in one of the corners. Probably that one. And if you enjoyed what you saw here today, or you just want more sci-fi discussions, head down below at the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. Also, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. Tell me how you think you would feel living on Khorasan during the Clone Wars. Do you think you would be terrified of Separatist attack, or do you think you would feel confident in the Republic's victory over the Separatists in the end? So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.